Here's part 3 of what to check for when inspecting a used car in person. Today we'll be going through what to check when the engine is running and also test driving the car. Subscribe for more on every step of the car flipping process. My name's Benjamin McShannock and welcome back to Ben Flips Cars. Now let's start the car up. And the first thing you want to check for when starting the car up is if any smoke comes out of the exhaust pipe. So let's go ahead and start her up. You want to do this especially when the engine is cold, because if there's some sort of leak in the engine, it will have had time to leak into the combustion chamber and the smoke should come billowing out now if there's an issue. No big plume of blue, white or grey smoke on startup. That's just what we want to see. Now you can see a little bit of white smoke is coming out now. That's just probably because the engine is cold and there could just be some condensation. If it was absolutely billowing out, especially if I come back a bit, you can hardly even see that. But if it was billowing out, obviously white or obviously blue or something like that, or grey, then that's when you want to be a bit worried. This is just what smoke tends to look like, or the condensation when you first start the engine. And as you can see, it's gone away now, so I don't think there's any problem now. You also heard the car struggle to start a bit, which could be a sign of a dying battery. You also want to check for if any dashboard lights came up when you started up the car. And here we just have the parking brake one, the P, that's normal. The seatbelt not on, that's normal because we don't have our seatbelt on. And also we have the little that a door is open symbol, that's normal as well because we have the bonnet open. How's the engine idle when you started the car? In this case it seems pretty constant, there's no major rattles or ticks, so that's a good sign. Even though the engine in general is quite loud, that is an older car, so that's a little bit expected. Most noises and problems will be revealed when the engine is cold, so that's why you really want to make sure that you can inspect the car when it's cold and hasn't been started up at least a few hours before you've arrived. As the engine warms up, everything will begin to change a bit, the idle should lower and the engine should become even quieter as it warms up. Is there any major movement in the engine? We can see this engine looks still whilst idling. We want to check how the engine shuts off, and then we want to start it up again to see if there's any movement in the engine as the engine starts. So let's go and do that. We can see as the engine shut off here, it shut off nice and smoothly, no big shudder. As the engine started, there was a little bit of a shudder, but nothing alarming, nothing major. Now you probably heard that time as I started up the engine, there was some sort of unusual whine. Not sure what that's about, it almost sounded like a belt slipping or something, but it should be okay as the engine started up, it's fine. Now with the engine running, you want to open up the oil cap and make sure that there's no major pushing or vacuuming coming as the engine is running. So let's open that up, put your hand over it, and I can't feel anything coming out of this at all except a little bit of warm air obviously, so that's fine. If it's billowing out, then there's probably something wrong with your engine, probably a blown head gasket or something like that. Now that the engine's warmed up a bit, we want to give it a couple of light revs just to make sure there's no movement in the engine. So let me put the camera down and give it a rev. You can see as we rev it here, there's some light shuddering side to side or just some light movement. It's nothing to be alarmed about in this case, a little bit of movement is normal. Beautiful. Now that we've checked the engine whilst revving, we want to also check the exhaust whilst revving. And now that the engine's warmed up a bit more, you can see there's a fair bit more condensation coming out. Once again, that's no real big problem, but we want to give it a few revs now that it's warmed up a bit to check and see if any big amounts of alarming white or blue or grey smoke come out whilst revving the engine. So let's give it another rev. So it's a cold day, you can see there's a fair bit of condensation coming out, but that's about normal. A little bit of water spitting out, which is just a bit more of the condensation. There's no billowing smoke that looks like there's a fire going on inside the car. As you can see, this car's been sitting for a few days, so there is plenty of condensation coming out, but that is nothing to be worried about at all. Hopefully no blue or white smoke, significant white smoke came out in that time. Now that the engine's running, we also want to check with our torch if there's any leaks or drips coming from under the car whilst it's running. You can see there's a little drip of something there. It has just started raining, so it's not a good time to check for leaks, but anyway, you get the point. If there's any significant drips or leaks as the car's running, this is a problem. If not, then that's good, that's what you want. You also want to check for if some leaks or drips happen once you shut the car back off. So check back after it again after you've turned the car off and after the test drive. Also, whilst the car is running, how does it smell? Especially around the engine bay. It just smells a little bit fumey, as you'd sort of expect the car to kind of smell like around the engine with the engine running. Nothing too serious. You also want to smell around the exhaust. It smells the same as the engine bay, which is probably about right. If it stinks of petrol or something like that, then that's something to worry about. And also, go inside, turn your vents right up, And if the air coming through with the car running smells like petrol, then that's also a problem. You really want to track where that scent of petrol might be coming from. If you can't figure it out, I'd just walk away. It's not worth the hassle of trying to fix what's quite possibly a bad engine. Another thing you want to do whilst in the interior with the engine running is shift between reverse, neutral, and more importantly, drive. Is there any big clunks or shifts when you do it? In this car, quite worryingly, there actually is. There's quite a big clunk when I shift between the gears. I'm gonna go quiet so you can hear it maybe. And you can see me literally shaking back and forth with that. That's not good. That's not what you want. That could absolutely mean that your transmission is going bad in some way, and honestly, the thought of fixing a transmission scares me more than fixing engine issues sometimes. So if I was actually looking at buying this car, I would walk away after seeing that, to be honest. It's not worth possibly getting a car with a transmission that might be working now, but that might fail whilst you're fixing it up, or might fail to the next owner, which someone won't be happy with you about if you're flipping cars. Just move on to another car, it's not worth it. Also, put the car in neutral and ensure that the handbrake is working. Now, in this car, I'm just gonna move back and forth and I can feel that the car's not gonna go anywhere whilst the handbrake is on and it says in neutral. You should actually do this with the engine off probably, it's a little bit safer. Sometimes you'll find that the car is moving, especially if you give it a good push from the back or the front whilst it's in neutral with the handbrake on, meaning the handbrake is no good. Handbrake issues can be relatively easy to solve, but they can also be difficult at times. Personally, I would still buy a car if it didn't have a working handbrake, if it was one of the only issues it had. Now, before we move into the test drive, here are a couple of tips I have. One, turn the air all the way off and crack the windows down a little bit. This will allow you to hear any suspicious noises whilst you're driving along, any creaks, any cracks, any ticks, anything like that. It would allow you to hear them much better. Also turn the music off, because the music, of course, can be a distraction. If you have the owner of the car sitting next to you and you notice he's trying to turn the music up all the time or something like that and being like, oh, look at the music, it works great, or the aircon or whatever, it could be a sign that he's trying to make sure that you can't hear some sort of noise that the car's making, so just bear that in mind. Leave a comment down below if there's anything that surprised you so far that I've mentioned. If you missed the 2 previous videos on inspecting a used car, where I went over interior, exterior, due diligence, general tips, etc., check them out after you're done watching this video in the corner here, or links in the description. Now let's get into the most exciting and fun bit, the test drive. Don't test drive the car if you already know that you're not going to buy the car. Don't waste the seller's time. Also, if the seller won't offer you a test drive, then you shouldn't have even shown up in the first place, because there's no way you're going to buy a used car without a test drive. That is just stupid, honestly. So here we go. It is now time for our test drive. We're going to turn the music off and the fans down as well, and put the windows down so that we can hear everything a bit better. What's going on outside the car, and even smell if there's any unusual fumes or whatever as we're driving, but that should have been revealed with revving the engine already anyway. So away we go. Now what you really want to do is first some suburban driving or city driving to see how the car operates at lower speeds. Then you also want to do some higher speed driving on a freeway if you can, and make sure the car can shift through all its gears smoothly and how it operates at higher speeds. And you also want to take it on a bumpy road if possible to see how the suspension and everything copes with that. Around my area here we have a fair few speed bumps. We're just going to fly over one of those at a fairly reasonable speed, a little bit quicker than you would normally take a speed bump. See how the suspension sounds and feels as we do it. Drive around fairly normally for the first 10 minutes as the most obvious issues are going to be revealed here. And that allows the car to warm up before you want to perform your acceleration and brake test. I can already hear there's a little bit of squeak and creak in the suspension as I'm driving around. Probably a little bit more than there should be, and I can only hear that because I have the windows down. Now we're going to go over the speed hump fairly quickly. There was a little bit of creak, but overall not too bad. The suspension felt good, it sounded not too bad, and felt pretty soft. Now, just as you're driving around, you want to ask yourself, does the car drive smoothly? Does the car drive straight? In this case, I can already tell there's a little bit of a leniency for the car to drift left here in this car, so that could be an alignment issue. A tire alignment, whilst it can be inconvenient, it's not too difficult to fix. Does the engine run smooth? Does it struggle when you're accelerating from a low speed, or even when it's shifting through gears? How's the transmission? Does the car coast okay when you lift off the throttle? Bear in mind, if it's a diesel car, it's going to coast a lot more than a petrol car, so don't be worried if you think it's pulling up a little too much when you're coasting and it's a diesel. On a nice longer straight bit of road, you're also going to want to flick the car into its manual mode, if it has one, and flick through all the gears to make sure that they're all working and it's shifting smoothly. It should be relatively quick between shifts, and they should be smooth, shouldn't be any clunks, any crazy things like that. It'll be a lot easier to do this test when you're already on the freeway. Whilst you're driving, you also want to test controls that only work when you're driving, like the cruise control. So you can see here we've got the cruise control, we're going to flick that, and you can see it says cruise on the dash, and you press set. Seems like maybe it can only be set at higher speed. It is better to test the cruise control on the freeway, obviously. Another thing, if your suspension feels a bit weird in general, like it's a little bit bumpy or bouncy, I mean, it could be the suspension itself, or it could just be that your car needs some tyre pressure. So ask the seller if they've pumped the tyres up in a while, and even look at the tyres. If they look really flat, then that could be part of the issue. Also, how are the brakes? Is there any brake noise when you brake? I'm going to give it a nice hard brake now, not too hard though. See, there was a little squeak as I first got on the brakes, but nothing major. You also want to make sure the brakes have a good feel to them, that they don't feel too soft, that the pedal doesn't feel too long. If so, that could just need a brake bleed, but it also could mean that the brake booster's gone, and you don't want that. Once the car's warmed up, you want to also do a hard acceleration and brake test. Now, before doing your hard acceleration or brake test, if you have the seller with you in the passenger seat, you obviously want to let them know what you're about to do. You don't want to just throw them around the cabin, so make sure you tell them and in fact ask them if it's okay for you to do a hard acceleration and a hard brake test in their car. If they seem particularly nervous about it, then there could be something wrong with the car that they don't want to disclose to you. Okay, so let's do our hard acceleration test. You basically want to stop and come to a crawl, or pretty much a standstill, and then floor it. Now you can see this car has long gears, so we weren't really shifting through many of the gears and stuff. That's why, once again, it'd be better to do this test onto an on-ramp on a freeway or something. The car felt smooth then, it didn't shudder or anything or really struggle as we went going. It felt as it should have, so no worries there. Now let's transition into the hard braking test. This one's going to be a bit more intense. You want to see if the ABS kicks in on the car, so you should feel it in the brake pedal. It should basically be pushing up against you, like bum, 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 rapidly against your foot. So let's test, get a bit of speed, and now give the brakes a good. Now the car should stop straight, should stop smoothly. You should feel the ABS kick in if you really give it a good hard brake. In this case, the car didn't stop perfectly straight, but as we said, this car does have a bit of a leniency to drift to the left, it seems, so that could be in part of the alignment issue as well. I doubt that's something to do with the brakes. You also want to see if the fuel gauge is sort of going down as you're driving. Make sure the fuel gauge is working and it's not just stuck in place, because that is a pain to fix with a broken fuel gauge. I've seen that the range is slowly going down on this, and the fuel gauge does appear to be slowly moving as well as we drive it. And there you go, that's really everything you need to check during your test drive. After the test drive, you want to immediately look under the car to see if anything's leaking out of it. In this case, there doesn't seem to be anything dripping or leaking, so that's great. And ideally, you'd want to do all those engine tests again, of starting the engine up, seeing how it starts, seeing how it runs, seeing how it sounds. If the engine shudders a lot, turn it off, see if it shudders as it stops, all those sort of things. You want to do all those tests again that I mentioned in the previous video, which you can see up here in the corner. Do that again once you finish the test drive. So overall, I would say when test driving a car, the key word is smooth. Everything should feel smooth. The braking, the suspension, the driving, the accelerating, just everything, the steering, literally everything. As you're driving it, it should feel fairly smooth, unless you're driving some super hardcore sports car or something, which probably isn't the case if you're flipping cars like me. Ask yourself, does it feel reliable? Does it feel safe? Does it feel like something you would want to own? If it ticks all these boxes, especially if you're buying it for yourself, that's good. It's even better if you're buying it to flip, because when the day comes that you are going to sell the car, then your buyer is going to feel the same thing. Once again, if you missed the previous two videos going fully in depth for the interior, exterior inspection, due diligence, more on the engine bay, the boot, etc., that should be up on the screen now. If you have any questions at all about inspecting a used car, drop them in the comments below and I'll get back to you. Like to help me out with the YouTube algorithm. Also subscribe so you don't miss the next car flipping video. I'm Benjamin McShannock, and thank you very much for watching Ben Flips Cars.